Do you use the word porn to describe your work?
I do, but I put it this way. I have no objection to using it because
Sure.
I'm very much the kind of person that words are very important to me. Maybe it just comes from being a writer, but there are certain words I refuse to use about what I do. I refuse to call it dirty, filthy, nasty, any of those types of things that most people usually do, naughty, any of that stuff, because I feel like that implies something completely negative about yourself and about sexuality, which I think is very healthy and we all need it. But by the same token, I don't have a problem calling it porn because it is writing about sex, or not writing necessarily, but you know what I mean. It's about sex, and so that's the root of the word. That's what porn means, and so that's fine. I think it's just that I tend to make the distinction. I say visual porn if I'm talking about most common things you might find on Pornhub or whatever. I make sure people understand that, to my mind, what we're doing is a little bit different. And so you might want to make that distinction, because yes, it's just as sexy as anything you'd see in porn, but it's a different experience. So, but I don't have an objection to it.
Sure. Well, I imagine when whether you say erotic audio or whatever term you're using, that people are probably caught off guard by sort of the comforting, affirming, the emotional support aspect of what you put out there. How do people react to that initially?
Well, most people, it's still such a young thing that most people don't even know what it is most of the time. So that's something you do have to do a bit of explaining usually. Um, but you're right in the sense that it does have a different feel if I were to say erotic or intimate audio versus audio porn. Audio porn sounds a little harsher for some reason. It sounds a little more like this is the soundtrack from porn videos, whereas erotic audio or intimate audio does sound like it's something slightly different. Um, I have seen every reaction, from things like people saying, erotic audio, what are you talking about? When I watch porn, I turn the sound off. I've seen reactions like that to, where has this been all my life? This is exactly what I want, because I've never seen myself represented in porn, and it is driving me crazy. I am not a 19-year-old hard-bodied, big-titted girl with belly rings and long blonde hair, and so it does nothing for me, or whatever. Most porn these days, although it is changing, but most porn coming up from 60s and 70s onwards, which is where a lot of people had their first experience with it, finding their dad's stash or whatever. This is what they came to expect from porn, was people who looked a certain way, guys who had 12-inch dicks and, stuff like that. So a lot of people are finding erotic audio and saying, I'm just so glad that I don't have to think about the visuals anymore, because it was never what I wanted. It was never something that reflected me or the people I was attracted to or my perfect scenarios. Some people seem to have a genuine voice kink where they just love people's voices more than they would love their appearance or any other thing that people can be attracted to. So it generally gets the reaction of like, this is an amazing thing. This is a really interesting thing. Of course, you're always going to get the negatives, the people that are just like, what is this? Like some people think it's weird, but I mean, you have to just get rid of that, because people are going to find everything weird. There's people that are going to dislike everything that is out there. So you have to just ignore that and say, this reaches enough people enjoy this, that if they're curious, even, you can just explain what it is and they'll find out if they like it or not the minute they listen. So
Yeah, you told us that it was really important to you to be true to yourself and that that's really worked out well. But I'm curious how you even came to this particular angle, or how you started approaching things from this direction.
well, I suppose I had been very interested in sexuality. I was on the track to go to medical school before I started all of this. I had decided that it wasn't for me after all, but I had thought about sexuality, studied sexuality at university quite a bit, and I had realized that there was I had a perspective on it that I felt was true to myself. Like most people, I think, you examine your own sexuality at some point in your life, and you think, what do I like? What don't I like? Who do I like? Who am I attracted to? That kind of thing. And so I determined that this, maybe what I am or what I like doesn't have a name. I tend to use very kind of just old school. I just say I'm a straight woman. I tend to use older terms for what I am because I don't really have a label for myself. Don't really want one, really. It's just this is what I'm into. And so I kind of knew this even before I started doing this. I had known this about myself. I identify as a woman who likes men. That's my thing in life. And it's been that way ever since I was a teenager. I've never been anything else. So I don't really, I don't have any problems with it, put it that way. And so when I started doing this, I just thought, because I was doing this for fun, for self-expression, just for myself, I thought, well, I just got to be myself. I'm just going to do what I like to do. Some people would write and say, hey, can you do an audio about this? Or can you do an audio with another girl or whatever? And I just thought, well, I could. I mean, it is just acting and I don't have any problem with it. It's just, it doesn't feel authentic to me. It doesn't feel like me. And so there's less enjoyment in doing something that you then start to feel like you're just kind of doing you're speaking someone else's lines, put it that way. You feel like you're living somebody else's truth. I just thought, no, I'm just going to stick with who I am. And there's so many people out there who represent everything, that there's room for everybody. I think it's great that there's, especially in audio, where there is room for everything, including like complete fantasy. Some people have these imaginary situations with, characters from games and cosplay and just, the most fantastical stuff, Star Trek and science fiction, everything you can think of. I do a whole series where I play a computer voice on a spaceship, where I'm a sentient computer that is responsible for her captain's sexual health. And so it's wild. I mean, this is stuff you could never do in any other way, unless maybe you had a big budget Hollywood movie, maybe, right? But they wouldn't get up to the shenanigans I get up to in a Hollywood movie, that's for sure. But it's just so, like, you might as well just do exactly what you love, because you can in this medium, and it's very accepted across the whole medium. Everybody's just, you do you, your kink is your kink, just explore it. It's no problem. So I think it's healthy to kind of stick with what you like. It's as simple as that.
And there's obviously a market for it. I mean, there's been a response to it. And, we're not looking to be negative about the nasty, dirty, sexy sex, the degradation and all of that kind of stuff. But obviously people are looking for something like this that doesn't have that necessarily like pulpy or campy vibe to it. And I think so much of porn is viewed that way, as either like vapid or outright harmful. So I know you're not putting this out there as some sort of therapy, but I know that a lot of people can really find meaningful healing by going through the motions in these ways and having these kinds of experiences. How do you feel about, I guess, sort of the power of this material to support people?
Well, I think it's you can't help but be affected when someone writes to you and says, I was in therapy for 5 years and nothing helped me more than listening to your audios for 6 months. And this kind of thing, that when you hear it, it's very impactful, as you can imagine.
Sure.
It's humbling. I make it clear when I put things out, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a doctor. If you need help, please go seek professional help. I'm not trying to be a substitute. But I do think that I've come to realize that sexual health is mental health in many ways. It's not the only thing that constitutes mental health, but I think that people completely underestimate how important someone's sexuality is to their mental well-being. And so I do think that any person who puts out kind of intimate type of stuff, from like in my case, or the types of things I do, has to realize that they may be acting as a kind of a sex surrogate in some ways. And that touches on therapy, that touches on a therapeutic approach to healing people's traumas, to helping them overcome things. I've had men write to me saying they were sexually abused as children and they had a hard time with their own desires and with their own, various issues. And so they wanted audios where they were in control of what happened during the sexual encounter. So I would make different endings of the audio that they could choose depending on what they were feeling like at that time. So they could choose whether they were going to orgasm at the end or not, because it was in their hands. It wasn't that someone else was making them do this. these types of things. So it definitely, I think it borders on a kind of therapy without it being an officially sanctioned
Sure.
type of, therapeutic approach. But I think that's only because really so few people in society are willing to talk about sex in any serious way, that even psychologists who pursue sexology as a career, or sex surrogacy or sex therapy, are generally looked down on in their own profession. I've known of sexologists who have said that they've been told by their colleagues, you're committing career suicide if you go this way. And so you think, well, this is such a shame, because certainly every therapist, I imagine, one of my best friends is a therapist, and she says, 80% of her clientele has got sexual issues. So why is this suddenly such a taboo subject that no psychologist should go into that field, when clearly it's something that almost everyone needs could benefit from some help with, or some guidance, or some, just to talk to someone about some issues. We all just kind of hurtle through puberty without even knowing what we're doing half the time. We don't know whether this is right or wrong. We can't really talk to anybody about it. We certainly can't talk to our parents about it. We learn sex usually from the street, from school, not from school, but from our friends, or from, as I said, dad's porn stash, that kind of thing. So I think it would be very useful if we could see it more as anybody who does kind of put out sort of sexual content could be seen more as a therapeutic type of thing. There's so many possibilities. There's so much you could do with it. People healing from rape trauma, stuff like that. There's just so much that you could do. And I do find that erotic audio is great for things like people who are transitioning. They don't know how they feel about gender. They don't know how they feel about who they're attracted to, or how they feel themselves, or their own body, or things like that. And so audio is a great way for them to explore these potential sort of, not exactly fantasies. Fantasy is the wrong word, but it's almost like visualization. It's like, I would like to visualize myself living as a man, say, if you're a trans man. So they get to explore that in an audio. They get to imagine this potential scenario in their life without having to live it, first of all, so that they can sort of do a bit of a practice run, if that sounds right. So that's what I mean. I think it has so many therapeutic possibilities. I could go on forever about it, but that's my take on it.
No, absolutely. I mean, as a sex therapist myself, I don't want to make it seem as if I'm like, swapping porn stashes with my clients on a regular basis, but I have pointed people towards your work and seen people experience healing from that opportunity to, I guess go inward a little bit, and in a way kind of get out of their own heads by not feeling the obligations or the expectations of a sexual partner who's in the room needing to be impressed, or that type of concern around trauma, or not being able to push pause, or whatever else that these audios can afford you.
Right. Well, that's awesome. I'm very glad to hear that, because that's great. That's exactly the kind of listener I would love to reach. That really makes what I do meaningful to me, and that's important to me as well. So I'm very glad if I've been able to help anybody that way. And I would love to work more closely with sex therapists or anybody that's involved in this, because it's just become so clear to me how important it is for people. But I mean, it's fun too. I can't make it all serious. It's definitely fun. You don't have to have any issues to enjoy this by any means, but I think it just speaks to how soothing and comforting and positive an experience it is if people are actually using it as therapy. It has to be a good experience, even if you just come to it just for the lulls, just for the just to get off. You have to realize that it's obviously really good. It's obviously a really good experience. So
yeah, I mean, sex is inherently silly, and that's part of what makes it so great. There's nothing wrong with embracing that.
Exactly.
Well, I imagine a lot of men feel kind of silly, a little bit uncomfortable, maybe finding comfort in that like digital girlfriend experience, falling asleep or listening to the affirmations of a total stranger. What would you say to somebody who feels a little bit shy or uncomfortable embracing this, when our society basically says like, this is what porn is, this is okay?
Yeah, I would say that don't mistake the I'm going to misquote somebody here. Don't mistake the medium for the message. don't get caught up in how you're experiencing this. focus instead on the connection. Here is a person, another human being on the earth, just like you, who's trying to reach out and give you a feminine presence, in my case, experience that is designed to, with the sole intention of helping you. Like there's many people in helping professions, doctors, therapists, all kinds of people that want to help other people. So this isn't unusual that I might want to do that too. And my goal is to reach out to people that are having trouble sleeping, or they're dealing with bereavement, or they're lonely, or they're, for some other reason, they would just love that moment of human connection. And some of the audios I do are non-erotic, and some of the most popular ones I do are a series called Sweet Nothings, which are non-gender specific and non-erotic. So the idea is I'm just cuddling in bed with you, and it's incredibly silly. The whole thing is just ridiculously silly. I end up laughing and just doing the dumbest things, but I also do singing and sleeping and all this sort of stuff. And the idea is I'm just, just put your headphones in and just pretend I'm there. Like there's nothing wrong with this. You're just enjoying this would be the same if we were actually best friends or lovers or long distance relationship or whatever. And suppose we could only communicate by Skype tonight because we were apart, because of COVID kept us apart or something. Like imagine that this is exactly how we would have to communicate. It doesn't matter how. It matters that we're connecting with each other. That's the important part. And so for people who are just trying to get off to sleep or something, they don't need to be an active participant in this. They can imagine that they're an active participant in this playfulness or this sleepiness or this soothing kind of comfort. And I don't think that there's any, there shouldn't be any stigma to it, because it's not, even if it is an erotic thing that you're listening to, it's the same thing. I think it's simply another way of enjoying sexuality that it doesn't have to be, like I've always said to people, just because you haven't had sex with a partner doesn't mean you haven't had sex. I have a really hard time with the term virgin these days. I try to tell people virgin used to mean like a girl who had been brought up in a convent. That's what a virgin was. That was the girl who back in the 17th century, she had no idea about anything. She didn't know anything about anything, even her own body. She didn't know. She didn't know where babies came from. She didn't know, it was a shock on her wedding night, that kind of thing. These days, most people, I would say, are not virgins in that sense of the word at all. That if you have been sexual, even with yourself, that you are a sexually aware person, you have had a sexual experience. You just haven't had sex with a partner yet. And I think it's important to make that distinction for people so that they don't feel that they're so different from other people, or that they're set apart, or there's something wrong with them, or anything like that, because this is a completely natural way for us to be. Sex with a partner doesn't even have to happen in a person's lifetime, but sex will, if you allow it. Your own sexuality will come out if you allow it. You will allow yourself to experience pleasure, and you will explore your own body if you let yourself when you're a teenager and things like that, or younger. And I think that it's important to recognize that we go through all of these stages in our life of trying to satisfy that inner sexuality that we have. And being with a real partner in the room is just one way. So if you're listening to or watching porn, or talking to somebody on the phone, or even a sex doll, or a substitute, like a fleshlight thing, or a vibe, or whatever, a dildo, whatever it is you use, these are all just ways for you to enjoy sexuality. And since there's no stigma for toys, for example, for sex toys, there shouldn't be a stigma about listening to somebody or whatever, however it is you enjoy sex. There should be no stigma to it, because the core should be you are enjoying sex. That's the important part.
I love that. I just have one kind of final question, and this was actually inspired by something you brought up. I'm finding it very interesting to interact with people online in this COVID era. For example, I watched my sister get married over a live stream.
Oh, wow.
And that was hard not to be there, but even more so, it was weird, because I've watched YouTubers that I followed weddings on live streams, and now I'm watching my sister's, and I'm only interacting with my family and many of my friends through the same mediums that I'm interacting with content creators that I watch frequently, sometimes even more than I'm talking to my friends. And so for me, I feel like we're probably going to see a very interesting parasocial relationship phenomenon start, where we actually maybe lose the ability or adapt our ability to relate to people differently because we're all, again, we're maybe, mistaking the medium for the message and moving into a very virtual only space. So all that to say, my question is, do you see right now, or are you predicting maybe a increase in people who are looking for your services, or a shift in the way that they're approaching you in general because you are now on the same platform as people who they might not get to see in real life?
Yes, it's a really good point. And I do think that that could become much more common from this COVID situation, starting it and then going forward. It could be something we see a lot more of. But I think that if people are worried about people blurring lines or crossing boundaries or not being able to understand the difference between their sister's wedding and a YouTuber that they follow, I think the difference is we have always had the ability, most of us growing up, certainly in the West, I'm not sure about other cultures, but in most Western societies, we grow up understanding that there are different levels of types of communication with people in our personal lives. So we know that we talk to our friends differently than we talk to our parents, differently than we talk to the police. We use different language, we use different types of respect, we use different, we express ourselves differently. We're using the same language in each situation, and yet it's very different. And we've learned this, we've kind of internalized this. We've learned how and when is appropriate to talk to people in a certain way. And I don't think we even think about it. I think it's natural. I think when you're pulled over by somebody for speeding, you talk to him differently, just naturally, than you would talk to your buddy who's been your friend since you were 5. And I think the same thing is going to happen with online parasocial relationships. You're going to realize that, oh yeah, I've met my friend and I've been talking to them because I met them online and I talked to them online, and that's the only way we ever communicate. But it's not the same as my brother. It's not the same as my best friend, who I may temporarily have to only see online. In some ways, I think it's going to be very apparent in some part of our minds that this is, your sister's wedding is a temporary situation. Your YouTuber that you follow is a permanent situation. You're not going to know that person personally. And I think we can make that distinction. It's not to say some people won't cross the lines. Sometimes people do. And what we do is very, like, by we, I mean erotic audio people. What we do is very intimate, and it can lead to potential problems in that area.
Mhm.
But not very often. I think people get it. I think they get, just like they've watched Hollywood movies for years and they don't think Nicole Kidman is actually their girlfriend, that kind of thing. I think that it's the case with what we do too, that it's easy to make that distinction. And so, but it certainly is interesting that the way you mention it, that everything now is online in a sense. And so, but to kind of argue that point a little bit, I think what would be wrong with that, really? I mean, we're reaching each other. We're actually communicating with each other. And the world is so divided right now. Especially the United States is so divided. And so everybody is so upset. And so their very values, their core beliefs, their core values are being challenged every day by a very sharp divide that I think anything that brings people together and reminds us of our common humanity and makes us actually want to be together and not talk about politics and not talk about religion and not talk about the things that can tend to set people off is a good thing. So maybe we all need more online friends. I don't know. I mean, just anything. I tend to think it goes in a good direction. The more pleasant reactions and interactions you have with other human beings, the better, I think. So we'll see how that goes.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Eve. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for asking. That was a good question.
Okay, well, I guess we'll consider that clear.
I'm
Well,
telling
it's
you,
a-
man, we just have to embrace the awkward. We are so awkward. We just need to just go whole hog at this point.
Yeah, for real. The pre-taped interviews are always fun because like the magic is in the room at the moment, and then it just comes to this like stop, start, stop, start. But yeah, I'm curious what your reaction is to some of that again, as we are kind of walking into this uncomfortable conversation, at least for me in many ways, around masculinity, around maybe wanting to cater towards masculine voices, which is not an inherently bad thing. But in a society that has such a confusing and complicated and frankly negative relationship with masculinity, I'm curious how it strikes you.
Yeah, I'm honestly going to go back to my ice cream analogy, mostly
Sure.
because I'm hungry, but also because I think it works. I don't think there's anything wrong with liking vanilla. I really don't. I think that it's a solid flavor, and for the people who like it, it should be readily available and made of the best stuff. But I think it just becomes a matter of personal preference and respecting those preferences and saying, you know what? I might have been told my whole life I need to like vanilla, and I really don't. Or I might have been told my whole life I was vanilla, and I'm not. And so I think it's an ongoing conversation, and one that is going to shift and adjust as we talked with Jan, like as we continue to explore what gender is and what sexuality means, and build new words and new vocabularies and new ways of looking at the world. Masculinity is going to change, and it has already, right? Like it has changed so much even in the last couple of decades. I
I
remember.
might argue in the last couple of years, not to say that the Me Too movement was about men, but in many ways it was. And I think that pressure still exists and should, right?
Mhm. Oh, certainly. I love to use the show BoJack Horseman as kind of an example here. And I know we have Miss O'Kist on next week, and she has a particular gripe about Todd being the only ace character represented. So we'll leave that conversation for another day. But I think you can see that difference even in that show, because when it started, people were like, "Oh, BoJack's cool and kind of edgy, and I like this character. I want to model myself after this character." And it dealt with the Me Too movement as it was happening. And by the end of the show, the general consensus among the audience, and certainly the show writers, was this is not a good character. You should never try to
Sure.
be like this
Not a
person.
hero.
Right. This is a manual on how not to be. So yeah, I think in terms of media, especially, you are absolutely right. Even the last couple of years has changed. So I love making words mean new things. I'm a descriptivist. And if masculinity means something different in 5 years, we can have this conversation again. But in the meantime, as long as you're respecting other people, you can like whatever flavor you like.
Yeah, well, fair to say.